Hey, Calvary families, Brian here. So good to be visiting with you by video. Of course, I wish we could be together in person, but it is what it is, right? Today, I want to talk to you about bread. How many of you have ever made bread at home? Like you took flour and water and salt and maybe some yeast and you put it into this lump of dough like this and you kneaded it all together. I think it's kind of fun. It makes your hands all sticky. It's kind of cool to do, but the sticky hands is not my favorite part of making bread. My favorite part of making bread is letting it sit overnight and seeing what happens in the morning. See, the way we make bread at home is you start with this little tiny ball, and then overnight it goes and it gets bigger and bigger, and it turns into this like big old mass of dough, and then it's ready to bake in the oven. Now, yeast is, of course, one of the ways that makes the bread rise. That's one of the things. But did you know that in order for the yeast to work, that the yeast actually has to feed on stuff that lives in the air? Did you know that? Like it's just floating around us all the time. And in fact, and this is my favorite part about it, that stuff that yeast feeds on in order to grow and make it bigger is everywhere in the world. On all 6 continents where people live, and maybe Antarctica, I guess I don't know, but all 6 continents where people live, people make bread like this, and it rises because that stuff, those little microbes in the air, is everywhere, everywhere. It's constantly around us, but we don't always think about it. And if we don't know how to tap into its presence, we can't do this really cool thing that we know as making bread. When I heard that for the first time, it immediately made me think about God and how he is with us always. Always. He's always with us. His presence is always near. Now, presence, I don't mean the kind of gifts that you get for your birthday, not that kind of presence. Presence meaning his closeness to us. See, God is always with you. God is always with you. Did you know that? You maybe heard that before, but how much do you think about it? Do you think about it all the time or just sometimes? Well, no matter how often you think of it, it's always true. God is always with you. Now, how do we know that? Well, I think we can see it in some ways, but the Bible tells us specifically in lots of different places. But one of my favorite places is found in Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28. And here's what's happening in Matthew 28. Jesus has died at this point in the story. He's died right on the cross, and then he's buried, and then 3 days later he raises from the dead. And then a handful of times he appears to his friends. Now, if you had just risen from the dead, you probably would have some things to say. And if you knew you were going to ascend then into heaven, you'd want to make sure you said really important things. And so one of the last things that Jesus says to his followers is something that we call the Great Commission. You've maybe heard that before, the Great Commission. And there's one part about it I really want to focus in on. So here's where it begins. In verse 19, Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and here's what he tells them. He says, "Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age." So what Jesus tells them to do is he tells them to go do a few things. Go baptize people, disciple them, teach them about me. And to be honest with you guys, those things were pretty hard, especially in that time and place. In fact, most of the people who heard Jesus say that out loud, they listened, they did it. They taught people about him, they discipled people, they baptized people. But most of the people who listened to him and obeyed him in that time were actually killed for doing those very things. It was not an easy time to baptize and to disciple and to teach about Jesus. This was a really hard thing to do. But Jesus tried to make it a little easier. He tried to help them understand how it would be possible for them to do it. And he says it right here in verse 20 with 5 simple words. He says, "I am with you always." I am with you always. Jesus was making that promise to his disciples here in the Bible, but I think it's a promise that applies to every one of us. Jesus is with you always. God, is with you always. So no matter what you're feeling, if you're feeling like something's really hard, if you're feeling like you're really worried, if you're feeling really scared, those are all times that it's important to know that God is always with you. Turn to somebody next to you right now and say, God is always with you. Good. Now, shake your head like this and say, God is always with me. Good. My friends, there are going to be times in the next little while, in the next weeks and months and years, when you feel worried, when you feel scared, when you feel like you don't know what to do, when you feel like something is too hard. And when you experience those things, what you need to do is remind yourself that God is always with you. Love you guys, miss you guys. Hope I get to see you soon. We'll be bringing you more videos like this in the coming weeks. Thanks so much. See ya.